The wind on the Texas plains in 1905 wasn't a gentle breeze, it was a sculptor of grit and despair. It whistled through the sun-baked cracks of the Holloway farm, carrying the scent of dry earth and old, unfulfilled promises. The farm wasn't big, but it had a stubborn presence, a low, sprawling farmhouse with a porch that faced the endless, empty horizon. This was where the life and the silence of the Holloway family had settled. Sheriff Thomas "Tom" Kincaid, a man whose face had been weathered into a roadmap of concern by 40 years under the relentless Texan sun, pulled his heavy coat tighter. The late autumn chill was unexpected, sharp, cutting through the thin air. He stood at the edge of the property, the dust swirling around his worn boots. This wasn't a job for the city police. Out here, 30 miles from the nearest town of distinction, Kincaid was the only law, and the silence told him something had gone profoundly wrong. He had received the telegram 2 days ago, a frantic, barely coherent message from the Holloway's nearest neighbor, Mrs. Mabel Jenkins, about a lack of smoke from the chimney and a dog barking incessantly. She'd ridden her horse over yesterday and found the front door unlocked. The sight she described was enough to turn her stomach, she'd written, and she hadn't gone inside. Kincaid approached the house slowly, the wood of the porch groaning a lonely welcome. The air was still, heavy. The first thing he noticed wasn't the blood, but the eerie, meticulous order of the exterior. The tools were hung neatly in the shed, the well bucket was resting on its stone lip, and the shutters, though faded, were closed tight against the night. It was the order of a family going about their routine, a routine suddenly, violently, interrupted. He pushed the front door open. The smell hit him first, a metallic, cloying odor that no amount of sweeping could ever truly erase. The light filtering in from the single large front window was weak, struggling against the grime of years, casting long, unsettling shadows. The house was not a mess. It was a still life of domestic devastation. In the living room, a half-finished game of checkers lay on a small wooden table. A kerosene lamp, extinguished, sat beside it. Kincaid drew his revolver, though he knew the threat was long gone. He moved into the kitchen. The kitchen was the heart of the farm, and here the scene began to take shape. Martha Holloway, the mother, lay near the stove, an iron skillet beside her. Her eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, a silent scream frozen in time. The methodical nature of the violence was what chilled Kincaid to the core. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. It was quiet, focused, and terrifyingly efficient. He checked the 2 children's rooms next. Young Billy and Sarah, barely teenagers, were found in their beds, tucked in, as if they had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. The lack of struggle suggested they were incapacitated before the violence, a terrible, quiet act that spoke of either trust or overwhelming force. But the father, Elias Holloway, was missing. Kincaid walked back to the kitchen and looked again at Martha. He noticed something small, lying half-hidden under her hand, a simple silver locket. He knelt down, his movements slow and practiced, and gently retrieved it. It was cold, heavy. Engraved on the back were the initials E.H. to M.H. A wedding gift, perhaps, now a chilling piece of evidence. He carefully placed it in a small evidence bag, the metal clinking softly, the only sound in the dead house. He pocketed the locket. The farm was a trap, a quiet, dusty, remote trap. The question wasn't if someone had done this, but why, and where was Elias? Kincaid spent the next hour documenting the scene, his notebook filling with grim observations. No forced entry, no sign of theft, money pouch still in the kitchen drawer. No witnesses within 10 miles. Silence is the only answer. The meticulous care in his work was born of necessity. There would be no CSI team, no extensive forensic unit out here. Just him, his horse, and the rising doubt. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Painting the sky in violent shades of orange and blood red, Kincaid made his way to the barn. The air in there was different, thicker, laced with the sharp smell of old hay and something else, a deeper, earthier scent, almost like stale kerosene. He found the family horse, Old Bess, tied securely in her stall, munching on feed as if nothing in the world had changed. In the back corner, near the feed sacks, Kincaid stopped. There were fresh tracks in the dust, large boot prints leading from the barn's back door into the vast open plains. Elias had left on foot, long after his family was gone. The tracks were deep, suggesting a hurried, heavy stride, or perhaps a struggle to walk. Kincaid stood for a long moment, the wind howling its lonesome song. The whole affair spoke of a planned, intimate violence. It wasn't a random bandit. It was personal. Elias was either the victim of an unseen horror or the architect of one, and he was out there somewhere in the unforgiving miles of Texas dust. The absence of Elias, coupled with the terrible stillness inside the house, created a crushing vacuum of suspense. The mystery was only just beginning to unfold, a dark seed planted in the silence of the plains, one that would take root in the minds of everyone who heard the tale. The locket felt cold and heavy in Kincaid's pocket, a silent key to a door he wasn't yet ready to open. He knew this case would not be solved with a simple arrest. It was a shadow that had fallen over the land. The isolation of the farm, the sheer emptiness, seemed to magnify the sheer terror of what had happened, a family wiped out in silence miles from any help. Don't let the mystery end here. If you want to see how Sheriff Kincaid uncovers the haunting truth behind the Holloway farm, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Give us a like, and stay tuned for Chapter 2, where we dig into the disturbing secrets Elias Holloway kept buried. Sheriff Kincaid returned to town, the grim weight of the murders settling on his shoulders like the dust of the plains. He first contacted the district judge by telephone, a sputtering, often unreliable connection, to arrange for the bodies to be moved. The judge, Mr. Harlan, a portly man whose voice was thick with local authority, promised to send his assistant and a wagon by morning. Kincaid, however, couldn't wait. He needed to track Elias Holloway. His first stop was the dusty, poorly lit town hall, where the official records were kept. Kincaid pulled out the old farm ledger and began to trace the history of Elias. Elias Holloway had been a quiet man, known for his stoicism and his relentless work ethic. He had inherited the farm from his father, a man who, rumor had it, had died of a broken heart after a devastating drought. Kincaid's mind, trained by years of small-town disputes and the occasional saloon brawl, began to sift through potential motives: debt, infidelity, grudges. He found the first crack in Elias's meticulously crafted public image in the mortgage papers. The farm was deeply indebted. Not just mortgaged to the local bank, but also burdened by a private loan taken out 3 years prior from a man named Silas Thorne, a land speculator notorious for his ruthless collection methods and his unsettling presence. The loan amount was substantial, far exceeding the farm's value. The deadline for repayment had passed 6 months ago. Kincaid felt a spike of adrenaline. A debtor fleeing after murdering his family to escape a lifetime of servitude and shame was a plausible, though horrific, motive. He immediately rode to the small clapboard office Thorne used in town. Silas Thorne was a tall, thin man, dressed in a black suit that seemed impervious to the Texas dust. His eyes, Kincaid noted, were unsettlingly devoid of warmth, like chips of flint. He sat behind a large, ornate desk, calmly smoking a cigar. "Sheriff Kincaid," Thorne said, his voice smooth and oily, "to what do I owe this visit? I trust you're not here about my property taxes." Kincaid didn't waste time. "I'm here about Elias Holloway. His family is dead, murdered at the farm. He's missing." Thorne didn't flinch. He took a long drag of his cigar. "A tragedy. Elias was a good man, if foolish with money. I hadn't seen him in months, but he owed me a significant sum, a promissory note, $600. past due. Did you threaten him? Kincaid leaned in, his gaze hard. Did you put pressure on him recently? Thorne smiled, a slow, chilling curve of his lips. Sheriff, I am a businessman. I deal in land, not violence. I sent my last formal warning by post 2 weeks ago. I gave him until the end of the month to make a partial payment or risk foreclosure. If he ran, it was fear of financial ruin, not fear of me directly, that drove him. Kincaid pressed further, noticing the subtle scent of expensive cologne mixed with tobacco, a sharp contrast to the smell of dust and sweat that permeated the town. Did you send anyone to the farm? A collector, perhaps? Thorne sighed dramatically, tapping ash into a brass tray. No. I was preparing the legal documents to seize the land. The law is my collector, Sheriff. But you imply Elias may have done this himself, driven mad by debt? It's a strong possibility, Kincaid admitted, though the sheer brutality contrasted sharply with Elias's quiet reputation. He observed Thorne one last time, noting the impeccable state of his boots, spotless despite the dusty streets. It was a detail that spoke of a man who rarely dirtied his hands. Kincaid left, the conversation confirming debt as a significant stressor, but not necessarily pointing to Elias as the killer, nor Thorne as an accomplice. The next crucial step was finding the killer's path. Kincaid enlisted the help of Jebediah Jeb Cross, an old tracker and former ranch hand, known for his ability to read the ground like a book. Jeb, a man of few words and profound patience, agreed to meet Kincaid at the Holloway farm at dawn. As Kincaid rode back towards the farm in the cold pre-dawn air, he opened his notebook. The locket lay inside, resting on a page of observations. He thought about Martha, her peaceful, undisturbed home, and the sudden, chilling disruption. Elias was an ordinary farmer. Ordinary men don't commit such acts unless they are driven to a place of absolute psychological breaking. But what if Elias was running from the killer, not as the killer? The notion was unsettling. Why leave his family to be found like that? Kincaid rode into the deepening shadows of the plains, the vast emptiness mirroring the huge, terrifying questions that haunted the case. The wind seemed to whisper a name: Elias. The deeper Kincaid dug, the less he seemed to know about the man who was now the prime suspect in the most horrific crime the county had ever seen. The tension was building, a slow, inexorable squeeze. Jebediah Cross arrived at the Holloway farm just as the sun broke the horizon, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the scene. He was a lean, wiry man with eyes that saw details the dust tried to swallow. Kincaid led him straight to the barn's back door. He left this way, Kincaid said, pointing to the deep boot prints, on foot. Must have been yesterday afternoon or night. Jeb crouched low, his old hands gently brushing the dry soil. He didn't just look at the prints, he studied the displacement of the grit, the angle of the heel strike, and the depth of the impression. Not just hurried, Sheriff, Jeb muttered, his voice raspy from decades of dust. He was staggering. See here, the left foot is dragging slightly, and the steps are too close together for a man running free. He was either hurt, exhausted, or carrying a severe burden. This observation immediately shifted Kincaid's psychological profile of the missing man. A cold-blooded killer fleeing a scene usually runs fast and clean. A staggering man, a man struggling, spoke of distress, injury, or severe mental breakdown. Jeb followed the tracks for a mile, leading Kincaid through rough scrub and over small, rocky rises. The tracks were consistent, heading due west, away from the nearest town and deeper into the sparsely populated plains. Then, they suddenly changed. "Hold up," Jeb commanded, pointing to a patch of slightly disturbed ground near a cluster of old mesquite trees. He stopped here. "Long time. See how the prints are shuffled, weighted down." He sat, or crouched. Kincaid examined the spot. Among the shallow indentations, he found a small, dark stain on a stone. He touched it. It was stiff, dry. Blood. He was hurt. Kincaid confirmed, his gut tightening. This changed everything. If Elias was injured, perhaps he was a victim who barely escaped a confrontation, forced to flee for his life after witnessing the massacre. They continued the chase for another mile until the tracks veered abruptly towards a nearly dry creek bed. Here, the boot prints vanished, replaced by the telltale sign of a horse and buggy. "He wasn't running free, Sheriff," Jeb said, standing up and dusting his trousers. "He met someone. Someone planned this pickup. That buggy didn't come from the road. It came down the creek bed, hidden from the house. They were waiting." The revelation was chilling. Elias hadn't fled alone in a panic. He had been assisted. This pointed away from the idea of a debt-crazed farmer snapping and towards a conspiracy. Elias was either the co-conspirator or a captive being taken away. The missing piece of the puzzle was the identity of the person in the buggy. Kincaid turned his horse back towards the Holloway farm, his mind racing. He needed to re-examine the house with the knowledge that the killer was likely not Elias Holloway, but someone who had conspired with him, or someone who had lured him away after the crime. Back at the farmhouse, the bodies had been removed. The silence was even louder now. Kincaid walked through the rooms again, looking for any clue a co-conspirator might have left. He checked the floorboards, the attic trapdoor, the cellar hatch. He noticed for the first time a small detail in the children's room. Sarah's bed was rumpled, but Billy's was pristine. He knelt by Billy's bed. The bedclothes were smooth, almost unnaturally so. He pulled back the worn quilt and saw what he had missed before. The pillow had a slight, almost invisible impression, deeper than a child's head would make. He pressed his hand down. The impression was firm, and there was a faint medicinal smell, like laudanum or something similar. They were drugged, Kincaid whispered to himself, quietly put to sleep. That's why there was no struggle. The lack of struggle in Martha's death, however, remained a profound and terrifying mystery. He moved to the kitchen. He opened all the cupboards, checking the dry goods. In the spice cabinet, tucked behind a jar of pepper, he found a small folded piece of paper. It was a recent receipt from a general store in a town 2 counties over for a large quantity of potassium cyanide, a common, easily accessible poison used for pest control on large farms. The purchase date was 1 week ago. The receipt was signed, not by Elias, but by a woman named Lena May. Kincaid stood up, the dry Texas air suddenly too tight in his lungs. The initial theory of a desperate farmer driven to murder by debt was collapsing. The evidence now suggested premeditation, poison, a co-conspirator, and a planned escape. The mystery had just deepened, evolving from a simple tragedy into a sinister, calculated plot involving someone close enough to the family to administer the poison without resistance. The isolation of the plains had been the perfect stage for an act of terrifying human betrayal. The name Lena May echoed in Sheriff Kincaid's mind, a fresh thread of suspicion pulled from the knot of the Holloway case. The receipt for the potassium cyanide was the first piece of evidence that pointed definitively away from Elias acting alone and towards a cold, calculating mind. Kincaid knew the general store listed on the receipt. It was a trading post, about a day's ride north, near the small rough-and-tumble settlement of Black Kettle Creek. He couldn't trust the telegraph line for a lead like this. He needed to ride. He spent the next day on horseback, the endless plains giving way to slightly more rugged terrain. The air was colder now, pressing down on him. When he finally reached Black Kettle Creek, he found a place that lived up to its name, a collection of weathered shacks, a saloon that looked ready to collapse, and the general store, its wooden porch worn smooth by countless boots. The owner of the store, Old Man Hemlock, was a grizzled man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose. Kincaid showed him the receipt. "Lena May," Hemlock repeated, chewing slowly on a tobacco quid. "Yes, I remember her. Bought a good bit of supplies last week. The cyanide, yes. Said her place was getting overrun by rats and coyotes. She lives about 5 miles east, near the old Smitherman place. Keeps to herself. "What did she look like, Mr. Hemlock?" Kincaid asked, his voice steady. "Tall woman, strong, red hair, though she kept it mostly covered with a shawl. Didn't talk much. Had a nice buggy, though. Too nice for a woman living out in the scrub." Kincaid's heart hammered a rhythm against his ribs. A nice buggy, the same means of transportation that had spirited Elias away from the murder scene. The pieces were beginning to fit together with a terrifying logic. This Lena May was not just an acquaintance, she was deeply involved. He rode to the location Hemlock described. It was a desolate cabin, smaller and more ramshackle than the Holloway farm. The surrounding land was neglected, dry and poor. As he approached, he saw a woman hanging laundry on a line, a tall figure with a mass of red hair escaping from beneath a faded blue shawl. He dismounted slowly, keeping his hand near his revolver. "Ma'am? I'm Sheriff Kincaid from the county seat. I need to ask you a few questions about Elias Holloway." Lena May turned. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and held a cold, disconcerting stillness. She was younger than Kincaid had expected, perhaps in her late 20s, with a striking, if harsh, beauty. "The farmer whose family died," she said, her voice low and even, devoid of any surprise or fear. "Tragic. I saw the notice posted in town. What about him?" "I have reason to believe you were in contact with him recently," Kincaid stated. "I have a receipt here for potassium cyanide, signed by you, found at the Holloway farm." Lena May didn't deny it. "Elias asked me to buy it for him. He said his own account was overdrawn at the general store, and he needed it urgently for a severe pest problem in the feed stores. I obliged a neighbor." "And the large quantity?" "If you're killing rats, you do it thoroughly, Sheriff," she replied, picking up a wooden clothespin and snapping it onto a sheet with unnerving precision. "And your buggy," Kincaid continued, watching her reaction closely. "You were seen meeting Elias near the Holloway farm the day the family died." Her composure finally broke, a flicker of something like irritation crossing her face. "I had a passing arrangement with Elias," she admitted, the words measured and slow. "He was helping me haul some equipment for a small fee. We met about 5 miles out, as arranged. He was distraught. Said he had to leave the farm immediately, that he was done with the life, the debt. He asked me for a ride, and I took him a short distance, dropped him by the main road. That's all." "Where did you drop him, Lena May?" 20 miles east of here, on the main route to the Oklahoma Territory. Said he had to get away from everything." Kincaid studied her, trying to break through the practiced nonchalance. She was too calm, too rehearsed. The detail of the passing arrangement felt like a lie designed to explain the buggy tracks. "Elias's family was poisoned," Kincaid said, dropping the bomb, his eyes glued to her face. Lena May's hand, holding the clothespin, froze. "Poison? I didn't know. The telegram only said they were killed. That's horrifying." She managed to shudder, but it seemed too forced. Kincaid noticed a small, crude scar running along her jawline, partially hidden by her hair. It was a detail that added a touch of complexity and roughness to her otherwise careful appearance. He knew the cyanide was the murder weapon, and she had purchased it. He also knew she was lying about only dropping him off a short distance. He didn't have enough to arrest her. Not yet. He needed a direct connection to Elias, a motive for their partnership. "I will be back, Lena May," Kincaid stated, turning to his horse. "Don't leave the area." "I have nowhere to go, Sheriff," she said, turning back to the laundry, the shawl shifting to fully cover her scar. Her last words were chillingly dismissive. As he rode away, Kincaid felt a profound sense of unease. This was no desperate farm wife. This was a calculating woman with a secret history and an unnerving lack of moral compass. He had found a key conspirator, but the motive for the crime remained hidden in the silence between her and Elias. The investigation was now focused on the nature of the relationship between Elias and Lena May, and the dark secret they shared, a secret violent enough to wipe out an entire family. "Sheriff Kincaid," now convinced that Lena May was deeply involved, dedicated the next 2 days to establishing the true nature of her relationship with Elias. He needed proof of a conspiracy that went beyond a simple favor. He started by riding back to town and visiting the local post office, a small, bustling hub of local gossip and correspondence. He spoke with the postmaster, Mr. Vernon, a man who saw everything but spoke little. Kincaid explained the urgency of the case and, with the authority of his badge, requested access to the recent mail records for both the Holloway farm and Lena May's remote location. Vernon was hesitant but cooperative. He produced a dusty ledger. The record for Elias Holloway was sparse, mostly bills and the occasional circular. But the last 6 months showed a pattern. Weekly letters sent to the Holloway farm from a P.O. box in San Antonio, and weekly letters sent from Elias to the same box. San Antonio is a long way, Kincaid noted, tracing the entry. Who rented this box? Vernon checked his records. The name registered to that box is Lena May Thorne. Kincaid's blood ran cold. Thorne. Not just Lena May, but Lena May Thorne. He immediately rode back to Silas Thorne's office. The atmosphere in the land speculator's office was unchanged, stuffy, heavy with cigar smoke and permeated by a sense of cold, detached power. "I'm back, Thorne," Kincaid said, tossing the P.O. box record onto the desk. Lena May Thorne. She rented a P.O. box to communicate with Elias Holloway for the last 6 months. She's also the woman who bought the poison and drove the getaway buggy. I suggest you tell me who she is to you. Silas Thorne's facade of smooth indifference finally cracked. His eyes narrowed, and he exhaled a plume of smoke that hovered like a cloud of guilt. She is my sister, Thorne admitted, the word a bitter taste in his mouth. My half-sister, actually. A mistake my father made with a woman of lesser means. She carries the family name, and I despise her for it. The revelation of their familial connection deepened the conspiracy exponentially. It was no longer just a desperate farmer and a lonely woman. It involved the county's most powerful and ruthless land speculator. Why was she in communication with Elias? Kincaid demanded. And why did she buy the poison that killed his family? Thorne rose slowly from his chair, walking to the window. Lena May is a schemer, Sheriff. Always has been. She ran away years ago, but she came back about a year ago, wanting a piece of our father's estate. I cut her off. But she's resourceful. She found out about Elias's debt to me. Thorne hesitated, a genuine look of calculation mixed with fear in his eyes. Elias was desperate. Lena May approached him. She offered him a deal. If he signed over the deed of the Holloway farm to her, to get the deed out of my legal reach, she would give him enough money for him to start a new life in the territory and disappear. She wanted the land for herself, to spite me, and to gain a foothold in the county. And the family? Kincaid pressed, the true horror of the plot beginning to crystallize. I didn't know about that. Thorne swore, pounding his fist lightly on the windowsill. Elias's life insurance policy. It was due to pay out a small sum to Martha and the children in case of his accidental death. Lena May must have convinced Elias that he needed to stage his death to escape the debt and secure the money for his family's future. Elias was drowning. He probably agreed to disappear and let his family believe he was dead. The motive was brutal: financial desperation, deceit, and a twisted scheme for a new beginning. Elias was meant to die and disappear, leaving the land for Lena May and the insurance money for his family. But the family died, Thorne, Kincaid said, his voice flat with cold fury. Elias was meant to stage his death, not kill his wife and children. Lena May, Thorne whispered, the realization dawning on him. She must have changed the deal. She killed them. If Martha and the children were alive, they'd complicate the land transfer, they'd have questions, they'd spend the insurance money before Elias could ever safely return. She took care of the loose ends. The psychological terror of the plot was overwhelming. Lena May had orchestrated the perfect, realistic murder, using Elias's deep, paralyzing fear of ruin to set the stage. Elias was either a willing co-conspirator to murder or the most horribly betrayed man in the county, set up to take the blame for the deaths of the people he was trying to save. Kincaid knew he had to get back to Lena May and find Elias. The entire chain of events hinged on the fact that Lena May had the deed to the Holloway farm. If she had it, she had the motive. He left Thorne with a warning, the land speculator's face a mask of shock and self-interest. The vast, empty plains suddenly felt smaller, the circle of deceit tightening around a crime of chilling human calculation. The next step was a direct confrontation to find the deed, and more importantly, to find Elias, who was now either Lena May's accomplice or her next victim. Kincaid rode back toward Lena May's remote cabin, the newly discovered truth about her connection to Silas Thorne fueling his urgency. The knowledge that she was using the family's ruin for her own financial gain, combined with the fact she had purchased the poison, made her the undeniable central figure in the conspiracy. The question was whether Elias was truly her partner in murder, or merely a pawn she had manipulated and betrayed. He arrived late in the afternoon. Lena May's cabin was quiet. Too quiet. The clothes she had been hanging were still on the line, stiff with the dry air, a detail that suggested she had left abruptly. Kincaid burst through the unlocked front door, his revolver drawn. The cabin was empty. Inside, the simplicity gave way to a subtle sense of disorganization. Drawers slightly ajar, a trunk moved clumsily from the corner. It suggested a hasty, recent departure. Kincaid began a systematic search. He moved the heavy wooden trunk and found a section of the floorboards underneath that had been recently disturbed. He forced them up with a crowbar he found outside. Beneath the loose earth was a rusted tin box. Inside, he found a small cache of money, about $100 in paper notes, and, most critically, a leather-bound land deed. Kincaid's hand trembled slightly as he unfolded the document. It was the official deed to the Holloway farm, signed over to Lena May Thorne 1 week prior, witnessed by a justice of the peace in San Antonio. The final piece of the financial motive was confirmed. Elias had signed the farm away in a desperate attempt to secure his family's future and escape debt, likely believing Lena May would simply seize the land from Thorne, not commit murder. He also found a handwritten note inside the box, tucked beneath the money. It was written on cheap paper in a frantic, almost illegible script. "Lena, I cannot do this. It is too much. I will not leave them with nothing. The law will find me. I will not have my hands on this. I must tell them the truth. Elias." The note was undated but appeared recent. It was proof that Elias had experienced a profound crisis of conscience, a final, crucial moment of hesitation that confirmed he was not a willing participant in the murder. He was planning to confess or reverse the escape plan. Lena May, realizing Elias was about to expose the entire scheme, had accelerated her timetable. She had quickly administered the poison, and then, fearing Elias's impending confession, had driven to the arranged meeting spot to intercept him. The whole scenario played out in Kincaid's mind. Elias, staggering away from the horror, injured or deeply traumatized, meeting Lena May, believing she was there to help him flee, only to realize he was now her ultimate liability. Kincaid checked the stable behind the cabin. Lena May's horse and buggy were gone, and the tracks led north towards the main road, the one leading further into the territory, the direction she had falsely claimed to have dropped Elias off. She wasn't fleeing alone. Elias was with her, either dead or held against his will. Kincaid rode hard, pushing his horse to its limit. The sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. He needed to intercept them before they reached any settlement that could offer Lena May an opportunity to permanently dispose of Elias. As he pounded across the darkening prairie, Kincaid found himself confronting the emotional core of the case. Elias Holloway was not a monster. He was a man broken by debt and fear, manipulated by a far more sinister mind. His psychological terror, the fear of losing everything and the shame of financial ruin, was the weapon Lena May had used. This realism was more frightening than any ghost story, the terror of being utterly trapped by human malice and one's own weakness. After 2 hours of relentless riding, Kincaid saw a faint plume of smoke rising against the pale blue of the evening sky. A small, makeshift camp by a thicket of cottonwood trees near a hidden spring. Lena May. Kincaid dismounted a quarter-mile away, tethering his horse. He approached the camp on foot, moving with the stealth of a predator. He was alone, isolated, facing an armed, desperate woman who had already demonstrated a chilling capacity for murder. The fate of Elias Holloway and the final truth of the Holloway farm killings rested on the outcome of this solitary confrontation. The air was tense, thick with the silence of the prairie and the promise of impending violence. Sheriff Kincaid moved through the darkening brush, the chill of the evening air tightening the muscles in his chest. He could smell the acrid scent of wood smoke and hear the occasional crackle of the fire. The cottonwood trees provided thick cover, and he used every shadow, every cluster of dry grass to approach the camp unseen. Lena May was sitting by a small, contained fire, calmly sipping from a tin cup. Her red hair was loose, catching the flickering light. The buggy was tethered nearby. There was a second figure slumped on the ground near the fire, a blanket thrown haphazardly over them. It was Elias. He was alive, but clearly unconscious or severely incapacitated. Kincaid drew his revolver, the metallic click sounding deafening in the silence. He stepped out of the shadows. "Lena May, put the cup down slowly and place your hands where I can see them," Kincaid commanded, his voice sharp and steady. Lena May did not jump. She did not scream. She simply set the tin cup down on a flat rock with unnerving care, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up at Kincaid, her eyes still cold and calculating, devoid of remorse. "Sheriff Kincaid," she said, her voice a calm, low drawl. "I expected you to take a little longer. You found the deed, I presume, and the note." "I found the deed, and I found Elias's note," Kincaid confirmed, keeping the gun trained on her center mass. "He wasn't your partner in murder, Lena May. He was your mark. You used his fear of financial ruin, his desire to save his children from a life of debt, to get him to sign over the farm. Then you killed his family to eliminate witnesses and secure the land immediately." She let out a soft, almost appreciative laugh. "You're smart, Sheriff. It was elegant, wasn't it? Elias was blinded by shame. He thought if he died and signed the farm over to me, I'd manage to keep Silas off his family's back and provide them with the insurance money. He never once thought I would hurt them. He believed the debt was the monster." She gestured toward Elias. "He barely made it out of the house after he realized what the pest control poison was for. I met him as planned, helped him, and then gave him a strong dose of laudanum in his coffee. He's been asleep ever since." "You poisoned a father who trusted you to save his family," Kincaid said, the disgust heavy in his voice. "And you killed 2 children and their mother in their sleep for a few 100 acres of dusty land." "Land is power, Sheriff," she retorted, her eyes hardening. "And Elias was a fool, a weak man who couldn't face his failure. He would have ruined my plans with his conscience. I was simply tying up a loose end, and he still is a loose end." Kincaid saw her eyes shift ever so slightly. He knew the risk was immense. The silver locket, Lena May. Martha had it in her hand. Why? She paused, a genuine flicker of something that might have been regret crossing her face. "She recognized me," Lena May admitted. "Not Lena May, but the scar. She knew my father before he married Thorne's mother. Martha Holloway grew up not far from my mother. She saw me near the kitchen window the night before, and she recognized the scar from a childhood accident. When I came into the house that night to help Elias set the stage for his disappearance, she wasn't fully asleep. She reached out. I had to silence her immediately. The realism of the motive was chilling. A long-forgotten childhood connection, a distinctive scar, and a moment of fatal recognition all led to the brutal reality of the crime. Kincaid knew he had all the evidence he needed. Move away from the fire, Lena May. Now. She looked at him, not with fear, but with a fierce, calculating defiance. You're alone, Sheriff, and I'm going to Oklahoma. You have no witnesses out here. Kincaid took a step forward. You underestimate a Texan's commitment to justice. Don't make this any worse. Suddenly her hand darted to her pocket and came out, not with a gun, but with a small glass vial. She hurled it towards the fire. It's not poison, Sheriff, she screamed, a genuine panic finally entering her voice. It's kerosene. The rest of the Holloway Farm kerosene. You'll never get me. The vial shattered, the fumes hitting the flames. The fire flared violently, sending a wall of heat and smoke directly towards Kincaid. In the confusion, Lena May bolted into the surrounding darkness, leaving Elias unconscious and dangerously close to the spreading fire. Kincaid didn't chase her. He had to save the one remaining witness. He dashed through the smoke, grabbed Elias's limp body, and dragged him away from the flames toward the shelter of a large cottonwood trunk. The buggy, startled by the fire, reared up and broke free, galloping away into the night, carrying Lena May's supplies and her chance of escape. The fire was now a beacon on the dark plains. Kincaid had a critical choice: chase the woman who was quickly dissolving into the vast, unforgiving darkness, or save the man who held the key to her conviction. He chose Elias. He used his canteen to dampen the fire's advance, knowing that the smoke would now draw attention, both welcome and unwelcome. He had secured the central witness, but the killer was free. The truth is out, but the killer is still on the run. The most dangerous game is about to begin. If you want to see how Sheriff Kincaid tracks down Lena May and brings justice to the Holloway family, make sure you've subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications and join us for Chapter 8, where the manhunt begins in the unforgiving Texas territory. With Elias safely secured and the fire contained, Sheriff Kincaid faced a chilling reality. Lena May was free, dangerous, and desperate. The fire's smoke plume, while alerting any passing ranch hands, had also given her the cover she needed to vanish into the rough terrain. Kincaid knew the land, and he knew the psychology of a cornered killer. She would head for the nearest rail line or a dense settlement where she could lose herself in a crowd. Kincaid checked Elias again. He was breathing steadily, the laudanum making him deeply unresponsive. Kincaid knew he couldn't transport him far on his own horse. He decided to wait for dawn and use the rising sun to spot any sign of the runaway buggy. As the first cold gray light crept over the horizon, Kincaid saw a rider approaching, a ranch hand named Willard, drawn by the smoke. Kincaid quickly explained the situation, omitting the more gruesome details, and instructed Willard to take Elias back to town immediately, providing a letter to the town doctor explaining the laudanum poisoning. With Elias safe, Kincaid began his solitary pursuit. He backtracked to where Lena May's buggy had broken free. The tracks were faint but discernible, leading in a reckless path northeast toward the Oklahoma Territory border and the small, dusty railhead town of Guthrie. Kincaid pushed his horse relentlessly. He found small signs of her passage, a broken tree branch, a small pile of spilled grain from the buggy feed sack, and a discarded, torn-up piece of her blue shawl snagged on a barb. These clues painted a picture of a frantic, disorganized flight, confirming she was not merely traveling, but running for her life. Late that afternoon, he arrived at a small, isolated ranch owned by an old acquaintance, Ben Crowley, a man who rarely saw outsiders. Ben confirmed seeing a woman in a buggy passing several hours earlier. Red hair and driving like a demon, Ben drawled, wiping sweat from his brow. Stopped for water at my trough, barely spoke a word. Said she was going to Guthrie. Sounded nervous. Did she mention a man? Kincaid asked, sensing the twist in the narrative. Ben paused, scratching his chin. She did, now that you mention it. She was muttering to herself, saying something about a dead weight and leaving him for the buzzards. Kincaid's blood ran cold. The man she was talking about wasn't Elias, it was likely someone else. Lena May was a cold opportunist. The disappearance of the Holloway family, the acquisition of the farm deed, and the murder of her family were all elements of a larger, more calculated plot. But the new piece of information, a second dead weight, added a terrifying layer of depth. Kincaid pressed Ben for more details on the journey to Guthrie. Ben mentioned a recent localized flood had washed out the main road further up, forcing travelers to take a perilous, narrow pass through the Dead Man's Canyon. It was a difficult route, perfect for an ambush or an accidental tragedy. Knowing this was Kincaid's only chance to cut her off, he rode hard towards the canyon. The sun was again beginning to set, plunging the canyon walls into deep shadow. The terrain was rocky and treacherous, demanding absolute focus. As he reached the narrowest point, the canyon opened slightly. Kincaid saw the buggy. It was overturned, its wheels pointing uselessly to the sky. The horse was gone, having either broken free or been taken. Near the wreckage, Kincaid saw a disturbing sight, a shallow, newly dug grave, clearly incomplete. Kincaid dismounted and rushed to the grave. It was crudely covered with loose stones and dry earth. He began to frantically dig with his hands and a small rock. Within minutes, he uncovered a man's coat. He pulled the coat aside, revealing the face of the deceased. It was Silas Thorne, the powerful land speculator, Lena May's half-brother. He had been shot once, cleanly, in the head. The final, horrifying truth of the conspiracy became clear. Elias was not Lena May's goal. He was merely the instrument she used to acquire the Holloway farm deed, her stepping stone. Silas Thorne was her ultimate target. By killing Thorne, she eliminated the only person who had a superior claim to the Thorne family fortune and the only one who could successfully challenge her ownership of the Holloway farm. She had likely lured Silas to the canyon under the pretense of a secret meeting, then executed him, intending to bury him and take his money before fleeing. Lena May was no petty criminal. She was a mass murderer driven by avarice and cold familial resentment, systematically removing every obstacle to her wealth and ambition. She had underestimated the difficulty of digging a deep grave in the rocky canyon floor and had been forced to abandon the body. The buggy was wrecked. Lena May was now on foot, alone and closer than ever to the railhead, carrying only whatever she could salvage. Kincaid was running out of time, chasing a woman whose calm exterior masked a terrifying, lethal inner darkness. The hunt for justice had become a desperate race against the clock, one where the only barrier between Lena May and freedom was the endurance of one solitary sheriff on a tired horse. Sheriff Kincaid, reeling from the discovery of Silas Thorne's body, understood the full scope of Lena May's chilling plan. She had used Elias's desperation, the Holloway family's tragic demise, and her own familial connection to Silas Thorne to orchestrate a double murder plot for a clean sweep of property and wealth. Now, she was on foot, heading towards Guthrie, the railhead, and her last chance for escape. Kincaid, exhausted but driven by a righteous fury, rode hard to the nearest telegraph office, 20 miles back toward the main road. He desperately needed to alert the authorities in Guthrie. He reached the sputtering telegraph office just before midnight, startling the young operator, Mr. Peterson. Kincaid dictated a concise, urgent message describing Lena May, her connection to the Holloway and Thorne murders, and the need to intercept her at the Guthrie rail station. However, Kincaid knew the limitations of the technology and the local constables. The train would arrive in Guthrie at 4 a.m. He had less than 4 hours, and his horse was spent. He borrowed a fresh mount from a nearby livery stable, promising the owner double the fee, and began the final leg of the pursuit. The ride to Guthrie was a desperate blur of darkness and dust. Kincaid's mind was laser-focused on one thing: the station. He arrived just as the first weak light of dawn was staining the sky. The town was a chaotic mix of rail workers, weary travelers, and early morning vendors. Kincaid immediately sought out the station master, a harried man named Mr. O'Connell. He showed O'Connell his badge and explained the emergency, describing Lena May in detail. "The train's due in 10 minutes, Sheriff," O'Connell whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "I can't stop the train, I can't cause a panic." "Just tell me which platform and keep your mouth shut," Kincaid ordered. He took up a position on the main platform, surveying the small crowd. Travelers were huddled by their luggage, ranchers in denim, a few ladies in long traveling dresses, and several laborers. Kincaid scanned the faces, the tension in his body ratcheting up with every passing second. He was looking for a woman on foot, without much luggage, and wearing dusty clothes. A striking woman with distinct red hair, possibly concealed. He spotted her leaning against a stack of crates at the far end of the platform, near the freight cars. She had pulled a heavy canvas tarp over her head and shoulders, attempting to blend in, but her tall, rigid posture and the small leather pouch clutched tightly to her chest gave her away. The pouch, Kincaid surmised, likely held the money she had stolen from Silas Thorne. He began to walk towards her, slowly, deliberately. The ground crew was already working, shouting and moving cargo. The train's distant whistle wailed, announcing its imminent arrival. As he closed the distance, Lena May must have sensed him. She shifted her weight, and the tarp slipped, revealing her face. She saw Kincaid, and the cold indifference in her eyes was replaced by a surge of pure, animalistic terror. Kincaid drew his weapon, the loud click cutting through the platform noise. "Lena May, freeze. It's over." She didn't freeze. She spun, dropping the tarp, revealing that she was wearing men's trousers and a heavy dark jacket. She had changed her appearance to better flee. She pulled a small, snub-nosed revolver from her waistband, the same one she had used to murder Thorne, and fired. The shot cracked the air, narrowly missing Kincaid's head and shattering a window in the station building. Panic erupted. People screamed, scattering, diving behind luggage carts and crates. Kincaid ducked behind a pillar, his ears ringing. He saw her bolt towards the tracks, the oncoming train bearing down on the station. She wasn't running onto the platform, she was running onto the tracks. "Stop! Lena May! Don't be a fool!" Kincaid yelled, running out from behind the pillar. She ignored him, scaling the small embankment and running alongside the tracks, clearly intending to jump onto the train's freight cars as it slowed. The train was now a roaring, steam-belching metal beast, seconds from the station. Kincaid ran after her, knowing he had one chance. He fired a shot toward the ground just in front of her. The bullet struck the gravel, showering dust and sparks around her feet. It was a warning, a desperate move to break her focus. It worked. Lena May stumbled, losing her balance on the loose gravel. The roar of the approaching train was deafening. Kincaid reached the trackside just as she regained her footing. He tackled her hard, throwing both of them off the track and down the embankment just as the colossal engine thundered past, its air rushing over them with violent force. They tumbled down the slope, Lena May's small revolver skidding away into the darkness beneath the freight cars. Kincaid used his weight and momentum to pin her, the rough fabric of his coat grinding against the grit of the embankment. She fought with a terrifying, primal ferocity, fueled by the imminent failure of her grand plan. She bit his arm, thrashed, and clawed at his face, her polished veneer completely gone. "You won't take me," she screamed, her voice hoarse, her eyes wide and black in the dim light. "You don't understand. The money, the land." Kincaid struggled, her strength shocking him. He finally managed to subdue her, pressing his knee hard into her chest, pinning her arms back. He took a deep, ragged breath, the smell of coal smoke and fear filling his lungs. "It is over, Lena May," Kincaid said, his voice raw. "Your life of lies is done. I have the deed, I have the note, and Elias is alive. He will tell the jury everything." The realization that Elias had survived broke her completely. Her struggle ceased. She closed her eyes, and a single bitter tear tracked a path through the dust on her cheek. The only sound was the train slowing to a halt at the station, its massive wheels hissing steam. Kincaid, battered and exhausted, had finally caught his killer, bringing a violent end to the cold, calculated terror of the Holloway Farm case. The aftermath in Guthrie was a whirlwind of necessary formality. Lena May Thorne, silent and broken by the loss of her freedom and fortune, was secured in the local jail, awaiting transfer to the county seat. Kincaid spent the next few hours detailing the conspiracy: the land debt, Elias's plan to stage his death, Lena May's purchase of the cyanide, the quiet murders of Martha and the children, the betrayal of Elias, and the final avaricious murder of her half-brother Silas Thorne for the money and the ultimate claim on the properties. He ensured that Elias, who was stable but still weak from the laudanum, was safe under the care of the county doctor. Elias was in shock, his mind grappling with the unimaginable horror of being an unknowing accessory to his family's slaughter. He was a victim of psychological manipulation, but his guilt over his initial decision to deceive his family would haunt him forever. Kincaid rode back to the county seat, the silver locket from Martha Holloway's hand burning in his pocket. The wind, once a voice of dread, now seemed to carry a solemn silence, a respect for the lives lost. The trial of Lena May Thorne 6 months later captivated the entire Texas plains. The absence of any supernatural element only intensified the horror. This was a case of pure human evil driven by greed and a stunning lack of conscience. Kincaid's clear, methodical testimony, supported by the receipt, the deed, Elias's note, and his confession of the initial plan, was undeniable. Lena May was convicted and sentenced to hang, a stark and severe justice delivered under the harsh, unwavering laws of the Texas Territory. As for the survivors, the path to recovery was long and fraught. Elias Holloway, mentally shattered but physically restored, was acquitted of all wrongdoing. Viewed by the community as a tragic figure, a man ruined by debt and victimized by a viper. He could never return to the Holloway farm. The silence and the memories were too much. He sold the land to the bank, now unburdened by debt, and donated the remaining sum, along with the children's life insurance, to a new local orphanage, dedicating his life to manual labor and quiet repentance. The physical farm was abandoned, becoming a desolate monument to the family that died there. Silas Thorne's estate, complicated by his murder, eventually fell to a distant cousin. The truth of his involvement in leveraging Elias's debt was publicly exposed, a stain on his family name that lasted generations. Sheriff Kincaid, the man who brought the gruesome case to its realistic conclusion, never fully escaped the terror. The sight of the checkerboard, the sound of the wind through the cracks of the Holloway house, and the memory of Martha's still eyes became a permanent part of his psychological landscape. He retired 2 years later, a man who had seen the worst depths of human nature. The Holloway farm murders did not become a ghost story. They became something far more resonant and frightening, a legend of human darkness. Children were warned against the perils of debt and shame, and the name Lena May Thorne became synonymous with cold, calculating evil. Years later, the house stood weathered, its windows blank eyes staring out at the plains. Locals avoided the place, not because of ghosts, but because of the palpable sense of human dread that clung to the dry wood and the dust. It was a place where greed had killed love, where shame had killed innocence, and where the silence of the prairie had covered a crime so purely human it haunted generations not with specters, but with the terrifying knowledge of what people are truly capable of doing to one another when driven by the deepest, most earthly of sins. The case was closed, the mystery solved, the killer punished. But the haunting, the true inheritance of dread, lived on in the dry, unforgiving dust of the Texas plains.